just want to make sure that we put the ideology behind these shootings in perspective. We spent the first segment talking about the El Paso shooting, but there was also another mass shooting in Dayton that killed 10 people. And one thing that we need to say about shootings like that is that stochastic terrorism is not just directed to minorities; it is also directed to women. Here we have a person who, when he was in high school, he was suspended from the high school itself. He was suspended from the high school itself. He was suspended from the high school itself for creating a rape list. He created a list of women that he wanted to rape and murder. This was behavior that he exhibited in the high school. He belonged to a band that talked about violence against women, that talked brutally about raping women, about wanting to do that. And his band members I thought it was all just fantasy for us, but I guess he took it a little too seriously. And we need to consider how the narratives we propagate about the inherent untrustworthiness of women, about women as acceptable target. Not we, but that some people do propagate. That the narrative some people do propagate. How they end up having consequences for how women are treated interpersonally. So when we see an uptick of violence against women, when we see women being targeted for not for not seeing these men as available. We saw that shooter in California who was going after women specifically because he wasn't getting dates. When we see elements like this, this is actually very compatible with the very same violence that we're talking about today. We often talk about white nationalism as an isolated thing, but many of these people, their gateway drug to white nationalism is stuff like Gamergate, is stuff like like the MRA movement and the pickup artists and people who are trying to get women by manipulating them and then beating them up and threatening them when they don't have them. So we need to understand that violence isn't just a macro dynamic; it also takes place in interpersonal dynamics as well, Herschel.
It goes back to the to the attitude or the feeling that they're entitled. With white supremacy, the whole idea is that other people are less than.
That's right.
So they're taking our women, they're taking our place, they're taking our job, they're taking our country. You took the damn country from the natives. Kill yourself. You know what I'm saying?
But Herschel, patriarchy operates the same way. It operates under the assumption that women are less than, that women are subject to ownership, and that men are entitled to their physical, sexual, or emotional attention. And that case, when you're engaging in interpersonal relationships under that rubric, violence necessarily follows from that when you find out the reality doesn't conform to your expectations.
So let me get this straight because I don't want to misquote you.
Okay.
So if a man feels or follows the ideology of patriarchal dynamic, he's going to be violent?
No, that's not what I said.
No, I didn't. No. You said it follows.
I said the ideology of patriarchy can lead to the assumption that women are less than, and that men are entitled to women's sexual attention, that they're entitled to their emotional attention, and that they're entitled to their political attention, and that men can effectively govern over women. And under that dynamic, under that entitlement, if you find that reality does not conform to what your entitlement feels, that will lead into violent directions, as it did here, Herschel.
It's amazing, and I hear you, but that dynamic I only see with white supremacists. I don't. Again. Which dynamic? Which dynamic? In our community, as far as just because you're patriarchal and you believe in whether it's a divine order or a pecking order, whatever you want to call it, to say that somehow that makes somebody less than, because there are women that believe that same dynamic.
Yeah. So there are black people that have a white supremacist lens.
So just because you're So just because that's a white supremacist thought.
No. What I'm saying is that first off, yes, patriarchy can be internalized inside groups. Both men and women can exhibit patriarchal thinking, just like blacks and whites can inhabit white supremacist thinking, Herschel. What we're talking about is we're effectively talking about ideologies that structure the way that human interactions can be governed, that structures who has power and interpersonal and macro context. When you're in a context where you think that women are less than, where you think that women have to cater to you, and that's what a lot of these people think. They call it. There's a movement.
So we are talking about white supremacy.
No, we're talking about patriarchy. We're talking about patriarchy and white supremacy and the elements and areas where they can intersect. There's a political movement. They call themselves incels, and what they mean is that they're involuntarily celibate. And what they're saying when they
Jesus Christ.
Yes, what they're saying.
This is what I want to shoot.
What they're saying. Come on, no, what they say. What they say. And there are organized spaces for this. What they say is that women are discarding them, so they need to take over women. They're saying that women are objectified and objects for their sexual satisfaction. This is predominantly a millennial and under movement, and I will say it's probably concentrated in the white population, but it's also a movement rooted in patriarchy. It's something that necessarily leads to violence. So if you subscribe to an ideology that says that you are being forced to be celibate by objects that are wrongfully denying your advances, and that you need to respond to that by embracing your inner alpha and forcing them to acknowledge you. That's when you find out that doesn't work in reality. When you find out that that's something that's not speaking to how humans actually interact, that's going to lead to violent interactions when you're a butt person. It has to.
And again, Antoine, I don't see that. I don't see that in our community. Now, I'm not saying it's not there. What I'm saying is it's overwhelmingly a white supremacy.
I think that we need to be careful about that. And the reason why, no,
you're not gonna. No, hell no.
Yeah, no.
The hell, hell no. You are not gonna put that off on us. Hell no. Chime in, people. No, you're not gonna put that on me.
I'm not putting anything on you. Here's
again,
why I'm saying we should be careful.
Okay.
Here's why I'm saying we should be careful. Black men are not immune to rape. They're not immune to sexual. They're not immune to domestic violence. These are all artifacts. These are all consequences. These are all parts of how patriarchy is shaped. Now we can talk about how quote unquote good men are against that. We can talk about how we have developed communities and parts of communities that speak critically against that. But we can't say as an outright thing that it is absent from our communities. There is absolutely there is gendered violence in our communities, and we have to be forthright against that, and we have to be forthright in its existence. We have to be forthright about what it comes from. That comes from the adoption of a hierarchy.
So again, you do not put all the.
I just said we have to be careful. Let me tell you something.
This is why I say here we have to protect each other. Men have to stand up and protect our women, our children, and each other. So again, if you want to, if there has to be, there's always some sort of hierarchy. I don't care if you live in the country. Antoine, go to an indigenous.
Hierarchies are created, Herschel. They are artificial constructs that are created based on the culture. That's why hierarchies change based on what country you're in or based on what that culture is influenced by. Hierarchies are reflections of political choices. Racism is a political choice. Patriarchy is a political choice, and these choices can't be corrected. We cannot portray these hierarchies as natural because these are things that are guided by power. They are guided by powerful parties. And when we're talking about patriarchy in particular, patriarchy actually benefits white supremacy. Patriarchy benefits the notion that white men should and do control every level of government and state. And so when we're talking about patriarchy, we are necessarily making arguments that undermine how society is structured and how society should be structured. We should never think that hierarchies are natural.
Okay. Well, let me ask you about this. Because I watch a lot of History Channel and
No.
Okay. I'm gonna ask you a question. So what about when the power structure is headed by women? Is that wrong as well?
Yeah. Our goal. Yes, our goal should fundamentally be equality.
Here's my problem with what you say. Here's my problem, because what I see inherently with your argument is that you try to make everyone equal regardless of what their contribution is. And in every society, the hunters that hunt, they eat first. The women or whomever prepares the food, they eat next. And There's a pecking order. There's still a hierarchy. You call it what you want to call it. When you don't contribute, what makes you think that you don't contribute and you can do what you want? And I help make the society function and bring something to the table. You think just by your being that you deserve the same?
Again, I think what's interesting here is that inherent in your argument is a dynamic that we actually see play out in the labor market. We see the devaluing of gendered labor. We see the differential valuing of gendered labor. When it comes to, it's very difficult to eat freshly killed food, Herschel. Preparing it is actually very important. Preparing it well is important to your nourishment. It increases the amount of nutritional value that can come from your food. There's nothing inherently that makes hunting and gathering that food more worthy of a task than actually preparing and cooking it. So, the gender devaluation of labor.
No, it's not.
Yes, because you said that the people the men should get.
I said the hunters.
You said the hunters should get it first.
So there are women hunters too. I said I said the hunters.
But we should be clear. We should be clear.
We should be clear that women hunt too.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So again, I didn't say the men. Again, you meant no. I did not say the men. I said the hunters.
I
said the hunters first, and those that
the interesting Herschel, the interesting thing, the interesting thing about gendered labor is that
you're making it gender.
No. I'm acknowledging hierarchies and structures and processes that are.
If the women are
when we're talking about things like domestic servitude, that's something that men have historically done. But there's also something that is coded and gendered as female and thus paid less. When we're talking about service sector work, things like nursing, things like being home care, things like that. Despite the fact that men also do home care and do that work, because that field is predominantly female, it is considered gendered, and that is reflected in the pay scale. We have to be clear that despite the fact that both genders can and do everything, that there is a gendered narrative and a history behind certain concepts. So when you think about things like construction work, factory work, when you think about things like joining the military, despite the fact that women have done all these things, these are gendered male professions and they are paid accordingly. Gender valuation of labor, Rachel.
I hear you, Antoine, and again, I didn't separate it by gender. I did.
No, you didn't. No, it's true that you didn't. But what I'm saying is that even in a non-gendered argument, the gendering of labor takes place, where you know that a pecking order and a hierarchy exists, and the hierarchy was premised.
It's not premised on sex, because in our society, you go to some countries that have elite army squadron that are all women, all female, around the world. You understand what I'm saying? So I'm not. You're making. What I'm saying to you is, there's always some sort of pecking order. You can call it what you want, and whether it's women at the top or men at the top, there's always going to be. Where is there somewhere that there's not a pecking order, Antoine? There's always going to be a pecking order. Those that have, or those that do the most work, excuse me, or contribute the most, are going to get first shot. I'm not saying that they leave the rest behind, but what I'm saying is the ones that provide protection, whether they're male or female, whether they're children or adults, they're gonna get something extra because they're providing something for the society. Now, the least of those get the least. Again, everywhere you go. See, what I hear from you sounds to me, this is me talking, this is me. It sounds like you want something for nothing. You want to sit your ass at my table. I don't work all day. You want to sit home and play games. And then when I say something like that, you get offended. But you didn't contribute. The reason that we're lagging is because we're not pulling together. I don't have a lot. He don't have a lot. You don't have a lot. But if we pull what we have, we can do something. But if you don't do nothing, all you do is victimize us because we have to take care of you. Whatever you bring to the table, Antoine, whether it's knowledge, whether it's your strength, whether it's whatever it is, you have to bring something to the table because it takes everybody to make this ship go. And the problem is when we have people that don't want to help out, but they want to take. That's the problem. And this is where we have to learn to work together as people of color. We all have to do our job. Don't worry about you only make $335, Antoine. So you bring your $335, you put in my $825, and we put it with your $425, and we got enough money to sustain all of us. and you don't have to go by the wayside. But what happens is you'll get a segment in any population that doesn't want to do anything, but they want to reap the benefits. And all I'm saying is we have to all pitch in. And it's not to minimize anybody. It's a group effort. It's a group effort. If I have to sit guard, then so be it. If I have to cook, then so be it. I don't see a woman less than because she can sit up there with a gun too.
Okay, but here's the thing, Herschel. Here's the thing, and this is I think hierarchies are what create the basis for the very kinds of oppressions that we continually talk about on this show. When we're talking about oppression, what we're fundamentally talking about is the concentration of illegitimate power into the hands of a few through the establishment of an illegitimate hierarchy. When we talk about equality, we're not just talking about something for nothing. We're talking about the equalization of resources. We're talking about the fact that we have a societal obligation to one another, and that the society and the structure that we want to create has to live off of that give and take, but it can only do so in a sustainably equitable fashion if we're critical of the hierarchies in place. When we're talking about oppression, we're talking about poverty, when we're talking about sexism, we're talking about mass shootings and white supremacy, when we're talking about the very things that have taken place this week, we are talking about violent reactions to that work towards the retention of hierarchy. Now, in a circumstance like that, we also have to be very clear that we are not blank slates. We are not drones. The societies that we operate in, they contain a large degree of elective choice. When I think about white supremacy, I'm not talking about something that's natural. I'm talking about something where I can point to the historical processes where it ended up justifying concentrations of resources and labor. The same thing with patriarchy. I think that we can do the same thing with patriarchy. And the reason why we should be critical of hierarchy is this, Herschel. We are trying to create a just world. We are trying to ensure that the concepts and the components of justice are incorporated into our goals and into our aspirations. So we have to be critical of the things that reproduce oppression. We have to be critical of the things that make it possible and easier for structural impunity to take place. And that's what these people feel. They feel like because they're white, because they're male, because their targets are devalued, that they have a monopoly on violence against them, and that the targets that they're choosing are acceptable. This isn't being afforded by nature. This is being afforded by a politically chosen hierarchy. What I am saying here today is that we can make political choices, and we should. We can make different political choices, and we should make different political choices.
Here, what we're here to do, Antoine, help our community.
That's right.
Come together and work against this nonsense.
Yeah, Bell Hooks.
But that's my point.
Bell Hooks calls it white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, and I think that's a perfect.
Okay, I'm not a white supremacist.
No. She calls the structure that we live in white supremacist.
Right. So again, we have to change our narrative. We have to change the way that we think and control what goes into our children, because they're being taught the same poison. So again, and
the poison is white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, and we should be very clear about that.
So again, we're gonna take back our narrative and control our narrative and what goes in our children, to our women, and to our men. And we're gonna take a break right here and come on back with our guests, I hope.